In the drought-stricken borderlands of New Mexico, an elderly rancher was about to make a decision that would change everything. What started as a routine fence line inspection took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a wounded federal. Marshal bleeding out in the dust. Eleanor Winters wasn't your typical 73-year-old widow. For 4 generations, her family had tended this unforgiving land, known for their stubborn resilience against whatever nature or man threw their way. When she encountered the Marshal's pale blue eyes pleading for water, her most precious resource, she had no idea she was walking into a conspiracy that reached from corrupt local officials to deadly cartel operations. Eleanor's simple act of mercy would lead to a confrontation that would transform an entire community's relationship with both water and justice. What began as one woman's desperate defense of her dying ranch would become a watershed moment for the region. The borderland community would never be the same after Eleanor Winters proved that in a land defined by scarcity, the most precious resources survive only when shared. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Winters measured her days by the water gauge. This morning, like every morning for the past 8 months, she checked the well level before doing anything else. The metal ruler she'd hammered into the concrete casing told the same grim story it had yesterday and would tell again tomorrow. Another inch gone, never to return. Eleanor's calloused fingers traced the wet mark where the water had been just last week, then straightened with a soft grunt that betrayed her 73 years. 4 months, maybe 5, she murmured to herself, calculating how long before the Winters Ranch would become just another abandoned plot in this parched corner of New Mexico. The sun had barely cleared the eastern mesas, but already the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Eleanor adjusted her straw hat and began her morning boundary check, a ritual that had become more about claiming what was still hers than securing it from invaders. Who would want this dying land anyway? The ranch had survived 4 generations of winters, thrived even until the water began disappearing 3 years ago. Not from drought, they'd weathered those before, but from the new allocation protocols that somehow always left her with less, while properties north of the county line stayed green. Her ancient Ford bounced along the southern fence line, tires kicking up dust that hung motionless in the still air. Eleanor slowed as she approached the boundary marker her grandfather had set in 1934. Something disrupted the familiar landscape. A dark shape sprawled half-hidden in the scrub brush near her property marker. "Damn fool hunters," she muttered, stopping the truck. But as she approached, the unmistakable outline of a human body sent a jolt through her aging frame. A man lay face down in the dirt, one arm outstretched toward her land, as if reaching for salvation. Eleanor moved cautiously, her hand instinctively touching the revolver at her hip. 20 years a widow had taught her that mercy and caution weren't mutually exclusive. "Mister, you alive?" she called from a safe distance. The man didn't move. His dark blue jacket was caked with dust, but Eleanor could make out darker patches spreading across his back and side. Blood. Not dried and old, but still wet enough to glisten in the harsh morning light. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, holstering her weapon and kneeling beside him. When she gently turned him over, his eyes fluttered open, pale blue against sun-darkened skin. His lips, cracked and bleeding, moved silently before managing a hoarse whisper. "Water." Eleanor's instinct to help ward with decades of practice caution. Water wasn't just a resource here, it was currency, life itself. Every drop she gave this stranger was one less for her survival. But some codes ran deeper than self-preservation. "Hold on," she said, returning to her truck for the canteen. She lifted his head and carefully poured a small amount between his lips. He coughed, then drank greedily until she pulled the canteen away. Easy. Too much'll make you sick. The man's eyes focused briefly. Ambush, he rasped. Cartel. Eleanor noticed for the first time the holstered sidearm and the badge clipped to his belt. Law enforcement. Her mouth tightened. The same government taking her water was now bleeding on her land. Don't talk, she said, more sharply than she'd intended. You've been shot. More than once, looks like. Need to warn. His eyes rolled back as consciousness slipped away again. Eleanor sat back on her heels, considering her options. The nearest hospital was 90 minutes away in Las Cruces. The local clinic had closed last year, another casualty of the slow economic, death-gripping small towns across the border region. She could leave him where he lay, make an anonymous call from town. By the time help arrived, nature would have taken its course. No one would blame her. No one would even know. The thought crossed her mind for just a moment before she dismissed it. Whatever grievances she had with badges and bureaucrats, this was a dying man. Her Thomas would be ashamed if she even considered walking away. Getting him into the truck nearly broke her. For all her wiry strength and determination, Eleanor was still an elderly woman, hoisting dead weight across uneven ground. By the time she had him in the passenger seat, sweat poured down her face and her back screamed in protest. "You better not die in my truck," she told the unconscious man, though whether from concern for him or the cleaning involved, she wasn't entirely sure. The drive back to the ranch house was a race against the blood soaking through the towel she'd pressed, against his wounds. Each bump in the road drew an unconscious groan from her passenger. Eleanor found herself talking to him, words spilling out to fill the silence and keep the stranger tethered to this world. Name's Eleanor Winters. Was the Winters. Ranch, 4th generation. Not that there'll be a 5th at this rate. Water commissioners seeing to that, making sure folks like me get squeezed out while his friends up north keep their swimming pools filled. The ranch house appeared on the horizon, a low adobe structure surrounded by outbuildings in various states of disrepair. Once these buildings housed ranch hands and equipment for a thriving cattle operation. Now they stood as empty monuments to better times. Eleanor had converted her son's old bedroom into a storage room after he left for Albuquerque 10 years ago, but the bed remained. With agonizing effort, she managed to drag the wounded lawman from the truck and into the house. By the time she had him settled on the bed, the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaking with exertion. "Gonna cut your jacket off?" she told him, reaching for the scissors in her medicine cabinet. "Cost of getting shot on my property." As Eleanor worked, years of ranch accidents and livestock emergencies guided her hands. The man had 2 gunshot wounds, one through the fleshy part of his shoulder, another that had grazed his side deeply enough to need stitches. She cleaned both wounds with precious antiseptic from her dwindling first aid supplies, stitched the side wound with the steady hands of someone who'd sutured countless injured animals, and bandaged both injuries with clean white gauze that she could ill afford to spare. When she finally straightened, her lower back spasming in protest, Eleanor noticed the badge and ID she'd removed from his belt. Luke Harmon, U.S. Marshal. The photo showed a stern-faced man with watchful eyes and a rigid posture, nothing like the vulnerable figure now occupying her son's bed. Eleanor filled a glass with water from her kitchen jug and set it beside the bed before heading to her old rotary phone. The line had been temperamental lately, cutting out for days at a time. She lifted the receiver and was met with silence. Dead again. "Of course," she muttered, reaching instead for her ancient flip phone. No signal. Also unsurprising this far from the nearest cell tower. Eleanor returned to the bedside. Marshal Harmon's breathing seemed steadier now, his color slightly improved. She'd have to wait until he was stable enough to move, then drive him to Las Cruces herself. "What kind of mess did you bring to my doorstep, Marshal?" she asked the unconscious man. As if in response, his eyes opened, clearer than before. "Phew, they're coming," he whispered, his hand suddenly gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't trust the water commissioner. They're using the water rights to clear the corridor." "What are you talking about?" Eleanor pulled her arm free. "What corridor?" "Your ranch. They want the land cleared. Smuggling route." His eyes began to close again. "Cartel's got someone inside the county, manipulating the water rights, forcing people out." "That's not possible," Eleanor said. But even as the words left her mouth, pieces began fitting together in her mind. The selective water shortages, the convenient bureaucratic obstacles, the neighboring properties that had already been abandoned. "They'll come for me," Marshal Harmon continued, his voice fading. "Don't tell them I'm here. Not safe." His eyes closed again as unconsciousness reclaimed him, leaving Eleanor with questions multiplying in her mind like summer flies. She moved to the window, gazing out at the barren landscape that had been her entire world. For 3 years, she'd been fighting what she thought was bureaucratic indifference or simple corruption. But if what the Marshal said was true, she was up against something far more dangerous. Eleanor checked the load in her revolver and placed it on the small table beside her rocking chair, which she positioned to face both the bedroom door and the front window. Outside, heat waves distorted the horizon, making the distant landscape shimmer and dance. She wouldn't leave the wounded man alone, not with the cartel potentially hunting him. Whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced every challenge on this ranch, head-on and without flinching. As the morning wore into afternoon, Eleanor kept her vigil, watching over both the Marshal and the land beyond her windows. The quiet was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of her rocking chair and Harmon's labored breathing from the bedroom. Then, at the edge of her property, she saw it. A rising cloud of dust moving toward the ranch house. Not the wispy trail of a single vehicle, but the billowing plume of many. Eleanor's hand moved to the revolver as her throat tightened with apprehension. Something was coming to her land, and for the first time in years, Eleanor Winters was not prepared to face it alone. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the revolver as the dust cloud grew larger. She retreated inside, trading the revolver for the pump-action shotgun that had belonged to Thomas. Its familiar weight steadied her trembling hands as she positioned herself on the porch, using a support beam for cover. The convoy materialized from the dust, 3 black SUVs and a tactical vehicle, all bearing government plates. Eleanor's jaw clenched. This wouldn't be the first time officials had tried intimidation tactics on holdout ranchers. "That's far enough," she called out as the lead vehicle stopped 50 yards from the house. The driver's door opened and a woman emerged, mid-30s, Hispanic, with her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Despite the heat, she wore a tactical vest over a dark blue shirt, similar to the one Marshal Harmon had been wearing. She held her empty hands out to her sides. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Deputy Marshal Maya Reyes, U.S. Marshal Service." Eleanor kept the shotgun trained on her. "What business do federal marshals have on my property? We're looking for Marshal Luke Harmon. His GPS tracker places him somewhere in this vicinity." Reyes's eyes scanned the property with practiced efficiency. "Have you seen him?" Eleanor hesitated. The Marshal inside had warned her not to trust anyone, but he'd been delirious, possibly confused. This woman hadn't mentioned the cartel or water rights, just looking for her colleague. "What happened to him?" Eleanor asked, not lowering her weapon. Something flickered across Reyes's face, pain perhaps, or anger quickly controlled. "Our team was ambushed yesterday afternoon while pursuing suspects in a trafficking investigation. Marshal Harmon is the only one unaccounted for." The rest of her team remained in their vehicles, a disciplined restraint that impressed Eleanor despite herself. She'd expected them to fan out, to approach the house from multiple angles while she was distracted. "He's here," Eleanor finally said, lowering the shotgun slightly. "Found him this morning by my south fence line. He's been shot." Relief and urgency transformed Reyes's posture. "Is he alive? We need to—" "He's stable," Eleanor interrupted. "I patched him up. He's inside." Reyes turned to the vehicle behind her and made a sharp hand gesture. Two agents emerged, carrying medical equipment. "Wait," Eleanor said, raising the shotgun again. "He said something about not trusting anyone, about the cartel having people inside the county." Reyes froze, then nodded slowly. "That's what we suspect too, which is why I need to see him immediately." Her voice softened. "Please, Mrs. Winters, Luke is one of ours." Something in the woman's tone, professional but underlaid with genuine concern, made Eleanor decide. She lowered the shotgun completely. "Come ahead, just you and the medics for now." Within minutes, the ranch house transformed into an impromptu command center. The medics worked on Harmon while Reyes established a secure perimeter, positioning agents at strategic points around the property. Eleanor watched from her rocking chair as government personnel efficiently invaded her space, setting up communications, equipment, and unpacking gear. "How did you find him so quickly?" Eleanor asked as Reyes returned from giving orders outside. "Every field agent carries emergency tracking equipment," Reyes explained, removing her tactical vest. "His activated yesterday during the ambush. We've been searching since dawn." She poured herself a glass of water from Eleanor's kitchen jug, then paused mid-motion. "I'm sorry. Should I have asked first?" The simple courtesy caught Eleanor off guard. "It's fine," she said, waving dismissively, though they both knew water was precious here. One of the medics emerged from the bedroom. "He's conscious, ma'am, asking for both of you." Inside the bedroom, Harmon looked terrible, but alert. His eyes locked onto Reyes immediately. "Maya? The others?" Reyes's expression tightened. "Johnson and Prakash didn't make it. Torres is in surgery in El Paso." Harmon closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the blow. Then he focused on Eleanor. "You helped me. Why?" Eleanor shrugged uncomfortably. "Couldn't just leave you there." "You could have. Many would have." His pale eyes seemed to see right through her defenses. "Thank you." Eleanor nodded stiffly, unused to gratitude from government types. "Luke," Reyes interjected, "what happened out there? Who ambushed you?" "Soto's men, professional hit. They knew exactly where we'd be." His gaze shifted between them. "Someone tipped them off, Maya. Someone who knew our route." "That's impossible," Reyes said. "The operation was compartmentalized. Only our team and the regional director had the details." "Then they have someone above regional," Harmon said grimly. He turned to Eleanor. "The water commissioner, Blackwell. I've been tracking him for months. He's been manipulating water rights across the county, forcing ranchers out to clear a smuggling corridor for Soto's cartel." Eleanor's hands curled into fists. "James Blackwell. That silver-tongued snake has been stealing my water for 3 years. Not just stealing it," Harmon said, wincing as he shifted position. "Diverting it, targeting specific properties for acquisition, creating a pathway along the border where there's no local presence, no witnesses." "We need to get you to a hospital," Reyes said, noticing his pallor. "No, not safe." Harmon's hand shot out, gripping Eleanor's wrist again. "Mrs. Winters saved my life. Now her property is the only thing blocking their corridor. They'll come for her next." Eleanor felt a chill despite the room's heat. "You're saying my water troubles aren't bureaucratic nonsense at all, that it's deliberate?" "Exactly that," Harmon confirmed. "And now that they know I survived the ambush, they'll accelerate their timeline." Reyes stepped away to confer with her team, leaving Eleanor and Harmon alone. "Mrs. Winters," he said quietly, "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." Eleanor snorted. "Sounds like the trouble was already here." I just didn't know what kind. We'll protect your property, he promised. But I need you to promise me something in return. What's that? Don't trust anyone from the county, not the sheriff, not the court clerks, and especially not Blackwell. Sheriff Dalton and I go back 40 years, Eleanor protested. Curtis wouldn't. Maybe not knowingly, Harmon conceded. But information flows through his office. We can't risk it. Outside, Reyes was organizing a defensive perimeter. Eleanor watched from the window as federal agents positioned themselves around her property, setting up equipment and establishing lines of sight. It was surreal seeing her dying ranch transformed into a government outpost. Your deputy is efficient, Eleanor observed when Reyes returned. She's the best tactical commander I've worked with, Harmon said with evident pride. We've called for medical evacuation, Reyes informed them, but there's a dust storm moving in from the west. Choppers are grounded for at least 24 hours. I'm not going anywhere, Harmon insisted. You'll go when the doctors say you can go, Reyes countered firmly. She turned to Eleanor. Mrs. Winters, one of our team was inspecting your well and found something concerning. Would you mind taking a look? Curious and concerned, Eleanor followed Reyes outside to the well, where a young agent was examining the pumping equipment. Ma'am, he said, nodding respectfully. I'm Agent Willis. I noticed your water level was low, so I checked the pump system. He pointed to a small electronic device attached to the main pipe. This isn't standard equipment. Eleanor frowned. What is it? Flow restrictor, Reyes explained, limits how much water reaches your property from the aquifer. It's disguised as a monitoring device, but it's actually throttling your supply. Eleanor stared at the innocent-looking box, rage building inside her. 3 years of watching her land die, of fighting bureaucrats who claimed the drought was to blame, of measuring each precious drop, and all because someone had installed this device to force her out. The county water inspector installed that 2 years ago, she said through clenched teeth, said it was for consumption monitoring. That lying bastard. This confirms what Luke suspected, Reyes said quietly. They've been targeting your property specifically. Eleanor ran a weathered hand across the top of the well casing. Can you remove it? We can, but they'd notice the change in your usage patterns. It might alert them that something's wrong. Reyes hesitated. For now, it might be better to leave it in place so they don't suspect we're onto them. Eleanor's expression hardened. So I just keep watching my land die? Just for a little longer, Reyes assured her, genuine sympathy in her dark eyes. Once we secure Luke and build our case against Blackwell and his cartel connections, we can address the water issue permanently. Inside the house, Eleanor found her phone line, mysteriously working again, likely restored by the Marshal's communications team. She watched from her rocking chair as her quiet ranch hummed with activity. Agents established security positions, communications specialists set up equipment, and medical personnel tended to Harmon. I know this is an imposition, Reyes said, returning from another perimeter check. We appreciate your cooperation. Not like I had much choice, Eleanor replied dryly, but I suppose any enemy of Blackwell's is a friend of mine. As dusk settled over the land, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful, Eleanor realized she'd spent the day surrounded by government agents without once feeling the familiar knot of resentment in her stomach. These weren't faceless bureaucrats hiding behind regulations. They were people with names and faces, risking their lives to fight the same corruption that had been slowly killing her ranch. The shrill ring of the telephone startled her from her thoughts. Eleanor answered it cautiously. Eleanor, James Blackwell here. The silky voice on the other end made her skin crawl. Good news. I've had a breakthrough with your water rights case. I'll be stopping by tomorrow morning to discuss the details in person. How does 9 o'clock sound? Eleanor's eyes met Reyes's across the room. That would be fine, Commissioner, she replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the rage simmering beneath. "I'll be here." "Wonderful. See you then." As she hung up, Reyes approached with a questioning look. Eleanor's lips curved into a grim smile. "It seems Commissioner Blackwell is paying us a visit tomorrow. Apparently, he has good news about my water rights case." Reyes's expression mirrored her own. "I think we should prepare a proper welcome for him, don't you?" Outside, darkness settled over the ranch as the marshals established night-watch positions. Inside, plans formed for turning the tables on those who had been manipulating Eleanor's life from the shadows. For the first time in years, she felt something unexpected taking root alongside her anger and determination. Hope. Morning arrived, with the promise of another scorching day. Eleanor stood on her porch, coffee cup warming her hands despite the already rising heat. The marshals had transformed her property overnight. Communications equipment on the roof, vehicles strategically positioned, agents patrolling the perimeter. To casual observation, they might have appeared simply as ranch hands or visitors, their tactical gear concealed beneath civilian clothes. "All in position," Maya reported, joining Eleanor on the porch. "We've got agents hidden in the barn and 2 in unmarked vehicles down the road. Everyone else is out of sight." Eleanor nodded. "And Marshal Harmon?" "Stable but weak. He's in your back bedroom with medical supervision." Maya checked her watch. "How punctual is the commissioner?" "Blackwell's never been late a day in his life," Eleanor replied, setting down her empty cup. "Says it's disrespectful to keep folks waiting. One of his many hypocrisies." Right on cue, a gleaming black SUV appeared on the horizon, trailing dust as it approached. Eleanor straightened her worn denim shirt and weathered jeans. No point dressing up for the snake. "Remember," Maya said quietly, "let him talk. The more comfortable he feels, the more he might reveal." Eleanor shot her a wry look. "Been reading people at cattle auctions for 50 years, Deputy. I know when someone's trying to sell me manure and calling it roses." Maya smiled and retreated inside, leaving Eleanor alone on the porch as Blackwell's vehicle pulled up to the house. James Blackwell emerged from his SUV like a politician at a campaign stop, perfectly pressed slacks, crisp blue button-down with rolled sleeves, an affectation meant to suggest he was a working man despite his manicured nails. And that practiced smile that had charmed county voters for 3 terms. Eleanor had once found him handsome in a slick, city-bred way before she understood the rot beneath the polish. "Eleanor!" he called warmly, approaching with arms outstretched as if greeting. "An old friend. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Your land always catches the sunrise just right." Eleanor didn't move to meet his embrace, forcing him to drop his arms awkwardly as he reached the porch steps. "Commissioner," she acknowledged with a nod. "You said you had news about my water situation." "Indeed I do." He gestured toward the house. "Mind if we sit inside? I brought some maps I'd like to show you." "Fine." Eleanor turned and led him inside, taking secret pleasure in the moment his confident stride faltered at the sight of Maya standing in the living room. Federal. Badge visible on her hip. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Blackwell's smile tightened a fraction. "Deputy Marshal Reyes," Maya introduced herself, extending her hand. "U.S. Marshal Service." Blackwell recovered quickly, shaking her hand with practiced cordiality. "James Blackwell, County Water Commissioner. What brings federal marshals to our little corner of the state?" "Just passing through," Maya replied smoothly. "Mrs. Winters was kind enough to offer hospitality when our vehicle had trouble." "I see." Blackwell's eyes darted around the room, scanning for other agents. "Well, I won't take much of your time, then." Young Deputy Raymond Willis entered from the kitchen, a strategy designed to observe Blackwell's reaction. The effect was immediate. Blackwell's posture stiffened, his composure cracking just enough for Eleanor to notice. "Raymond? Raymond Willis?" Good heavens, is that you? Blackwell recovered with a laugh. Last time I saw you, you were heading to college. Your folks never mentioned you joined the Marshals. Raymond nodded stiffly. Commissioner, it's been a while. How are your parents? Still enjoying that nice property up by Silver Creek? That water access agreement we worked out must be serving them well. They're fine, Raymond replied, his discomfort evident to everyone in the room. Eleanor watched the exchange with newfound understanding. So that's how Blackwell operated, helping certain families while hindering others, creating a network of loyalty and obligation. Blackwell turned back to Eleanor, unfolding maps on her kitchen table. Now, Eleanor, about your water situation. I've been reviewing your case personally, and I think I've found a solution that could work for everyone. Eleanor sat across from him, noting how he positioned himself with his back to the wall, maintaining sightlines to both doorways, not the behavior of an ordinary bureaucrat. I've identified a watershed management approach that could restore some of your water access, Blackwell continued, pointing to colored sections on the map. The county would implement a partial flow restoration to your property in exchange for a conservation easement on your southern acreage. Conservation easement, Eleanor echoed skeptically. That's just a fancy way of saying you want me to sell my land. Blackwell chuckled disarmingly. Not sell, Eleanor. You'd retain ownership. You'd simply grant access and usage rights for environmental monitoring. It's a win-win. You get water. The county gets to establish a protected corridor for wildlife migration. Wildlife migration, Eleanor repeated flatly. Since when has the county been concerned about wildlife? It's a new initiative, Blackwell explained smoothly. Federal grants involved, quite substantial ones actually. Maya leaned against the wall, saying nothing but observing everything, the way Blackwell's eyes periodically darted to the closed back bedroom door, how his left hand tapped the table when Eleanor questioned him. And if I refuse this generous offer? Eleanor asked. Blackwell's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened slightly. Well, the drought conditions continue to worsen, as you know. The county board is considering emergency water allocations that would further restrict non-essential usage. He spread his hands apologetically. I've been fighting for you, Eleanor, but without this compromise, I'm afraid your situation will only deteriorate. Eleanor had spent years believing Blackwell was merely an opportunistic bureaucrat. Now, seeing him through the lens of what she'd learned from Harmon, his every gesture revealed calculation and threat beneath the veneer of concern. I'd like to think about it, she said, feigning uncertainty. This is a big decision. Of course, Blackwell nodded magnanimously, but I should mention this opportunity has a time limit. The federal funding requires commitments by the end of the month. From the kitchen, a small crash sounded as Raymond accidentally knocked over a mug. Blackwell turned toward the noise, and Eleanor noticed his hand instinctively move toward his waistband before stopping himself. Sorry about that, Raymond apologized, cleaning up the broken ceramic. No harm done, Blackwell said smoothly, but his eyes lingered on Raymond with calculation. The bedroom door opened, and a marshal acting as a medic stepped out, quickly closing it behind him, but not before the sound of coughing came from inside. Someone else having vehicle trouble? Blackwell asked, his casual tone belied by the sudden tension in his shoulders. One of our colleagues is under the weather, Meyer explained, nothing serious. I see. Blackwell gathered his maps with hands that moved just a fraction too quickly. Well, I should get going. Eleanor, please consider my offer carefully. It really is the best option available to you. Eleanor rose, meeting his gaze directly. Actually, James, I've decided. I'm not interested in your easement. Surprise flickered across his face. Eleanor, be reasonable. Without this agreement, I said no. Her voice carried the iron certainty of someone who had made peace with her decision. I'll take my chances with the water I have. Blackwell's charming mask slipped for just an instant, revealing cold calculation beneath. That would be extremely unwise. Your property will be worthless in months without proper water access. Then it'll be worthless, Eleanor replied, calmly, but it'll still be mine. The silence that followed crackled with tension. Blackwell recovered his smile, but it no longer reached his eyes. I respect your independence, Eleanor. Always have. But this isn't just about you. It's about responsible resource management for the entire county. He picked up his briefcase. The offer remains open for now. Call me when you reconsider. I'll walk you out, Maya offered, the request clearly not optional. As they moved toward the door, Blackwell paused by a side table where Luke's service weapon had been partially concealed under a cloth. His gaze lingered on it for a fraction too long, before Maya subtly shifted position, blocking his view. "Pleasure meeting you, Deputy Reyes," Blackwell said, extending his hand. "If you're in the area long, the county sheriff's office would be happy to provide any assistance your team needs." "I appreciate that," Maya replied, her smile professional and revealing nothing. When the door closed behind him, they watched through the window as Blackwell's SUV disappeared down the dusty road. Only then did Eleanor release the breath she'd been holding. "That man has never set foot on my property without asking for coffee. Before," she observed, "he was too distracted today." Raymond looked shaken. "He helped my parents secure their water rights 5 years ago, said it was due to their conservation efforts, but—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Maya disappeared into the back bedroom, returning moments later with a leather portfolio which she placed on the table. "These were in Luke's tactical bag," she explained, spreading surveillance photos across the surface. "He's been building this case for months." Eleanor stared at the images. Blackwell shaking hands with a well-dressed Hispanic man in an isolated parking lot. Blackwell examining documents with county engineers beside a water diversion station. Blackwell accepting an envelope from a man whom Maya identified as one of Miguel Soto's lieutenants. "The cartel isn't just smuggling drugs," Maya explained. "They're buying infrastructure, creating a corridor from the border through exactly the properties targeted by Blackwell's water restrictions." Eleanor sank into her chair, the full scope of the conspiracy finally clear. "So my land isn't just in their way, it's part of their planned route." "It's the Keystone property," Maya confirmed, "the last piece they need to complete a straight shot from the border to the interstate." Eleanor stared at the photos, decades of frustration crystallizing into cold resolve. "Then they'll have to go through me to get it," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "And I don't plan on making that easy." Outside, the sun beat down on her dying fields. The land she'd fought so hard to save now revealed as something far more valuable and dangerous than she had ever imagined. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Eleanor's land when a dusty Honda Civic appeared on the horizon. Unlike Blackwell's territorial approach or the Marshal's tactical arrival, this vehicle moved with hesitation, slowing at the cattle guard as if its driver might reconsider and turn back. Eleanor recognized the car before she could make out the driver. Her hands stilled on the stock tank she'd been cleaning, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. "Sarah," she murmured, wiping her hands on her jeans. She hadn't seen her daughter-in-law in nearly 3 years, not since the funeral for old man Hendricks, when she and Michael had driven in from Albuquerque, stayed exactly 4 hours, and left before sunset. Just like Michael to send Sarah alone, to do whatever this was. Maya approached from the barn, where she'd been coordinating with her team. "Someone you know?" "My son's wife," Eleanor replied, her voice carefully neutral, "though what she's doing here without him is anyone's guess." The Honda parked beside the porch, and Sarah emerged, still slender and straight-backed, her dark hair now streaked with premature silver, wearing clothes too formal for ranch life, but too casual for a courtroom. The environmental lawyer who'd once told Eleanor that fighting the county water board was tilting at windmills. "Eleanor!" Sarah called, shielding her eyes against the sun. "I hope I'm not intruding." "A bit late to worry about that," Eleanor replied, but there was less bite in it than she'd intended. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Michael finally remember he has a mother." Sarah's shoulders tensed, then deliberately relaxed. "Michael doesn't know I'm here. Marissa Suarez in my office handles Southwestern water litigation. She saw your case file cross Commissioner Blackwell's desk yesterday with some unusual notations. She thought I should know." Maya stepped forward, badge visible. "Deputy Marshal Reyes, you said you're a lawyer." Sarah's professional composure faltered at the sight of the badge. "Environmental law, specializing in water rights. What's going on here, Eleanor? Why are there federal marshals on your property?" Before Eleanor could respond, the ranch house door opened and Luke appeared, leaning heavily on the doorframe. He'd insisted on getting out of bed, despite the medic's objections, his face pale but determined. "You shouldn't be up," Maya scolded, moving to support him. "Needed to stretch," Luke countered, his eyes fixing on Sarah. "Who's this?" "My daughter-in-law," Eleanor answered, watching Sarah's confused expression, who apparently showed up just in time for all the excitement. Inside, Sarah stood in Eleanor's kitchen, arms crossed defensively as Maya explained the situation. The cartel's smuggling, corridor, Blackwell's corruption, the targeted water restrictions. "So it wasn't just bureaucratic obstruction," Sarah murmured, glancing at Eleanor with something like apology in her eyes. "You were right." "Don't sound so surprised," Eleanor replied dryly. Luke, seated at the kitchen table despite his obvious pain, spread out maps of the county. Soto's cartel has been methodically creating a smuggling pathway, buying or pressuring property owners to sell through targeted hardships like the water restrictions. They want a straight shot from the border to Interstate 25, Maya continued, tracing the route with her finger. Minimal population, limited law enforcement presence, and cooperative or absent landowners. Sarah studied the map, her legal, mind-connecting pieces. "I've represented 3 clients from this exact corridor in water disputes. All eventually sold or abandoned their properties." She looked up sharply. "I thought I was just losing cases to an unsympathetic county board. I never saw the pattern." "None of us did, until Luke started putting it together," Maya said, her admiration evident. "And nearly got killed for it," Luke added grimly. "Soto doesn't leave loose ends." Eleanor watched this exchange from the doorway, conflicted emotions churning inside her. Sarah's presence awakened old wounds. The arguments about Michael leaving the ranch, Sarah's insistence that holding onto a failing property was foolish sentimentality, the gradual disintegration of family bonds. "Where are your legal files?" Sarah asked Eleanor, professional instincts taking over. "I want to review the history of your water case." Eleanor hesitated, pride warring with practicality. Finally, she nodded toward the study. File cabinet, bottom drawer, marked waterboard. As Sarah disappeared into the study, Luke turned to Eleanor. "We could use her expertise. Water law is specialized." "I know that," Eleanor snapped, then sighed. "Sorry. Old wounds." Maya tactfully excused herself to check with the surveillance team, leaving Eleanor and Luke alone. "Mind if I ask what happened?" Luke inquired carefully. Eleanor's weathered hands curled around a coffee mug. "My son Michael met Sarah in college. They fell in love, got married. He brought her back here, thinking they'd take over the ranch someday." She stared out the window at the parched land. 3 years of drought changed their minds. Sarah said fighting for water rights was a losing battle, said we should sell while the land still had value. "She wasn't wrong from a practical standpoint," Luke observed. No, she wasn't, Eleanor admitted, but this land isn't just property. It's... She trailed off, unable to articulate the bone-deep connection she felt to this patch of earth. It's who you are, Luke finished for her. I understand that. Some things aren't measured by their market value. Across town, Raymond Willis stood in his parents' kitchen, surrounded by childhood memories and uncomfortable questions. His mother's concerned face watched him as he examined their water usage documents. "Why are you asking about our water?" "Agreement, Ray?" she asked, setting a glass of tea before him. "You know your father worked hard to implement those conservation measures." "I know, Mom. I just need to understand how the approval process worked." His father entered from the back porch, wiping his hands on a rag. "Commissioner Blackwell recognized our erosion control efforts, said we were a model for the county." Pride shone in the older man's eyes. "Our system actually returns more water to the aquifer than we take out." Raymond nodded, noticing a letter in the file with Blackwell's signature, dated 3 weeks, after 5 neighboring ranches had their water allocations reduced, including Eleanor Winters. "Did you ever wonder why some neighbors got cut back while we didn't?" he asked carefully. His father frowned. Blackwell said it was based on conservation compliance. Those who didn't implement proper measures saw reductions. He studied his son's face. "Why all these questions, Raymond? Something happened at work." Raymond thought of Eleanor's dying fields, of Blackwell's smiling duplicity, of the cartel money purchasing a smuggling corridor through his community. "Just following up on some inconsistencies," he said, unwilling to burden his parents with the truth just yet. "Did Blackwell ever ask for anything in return for helping with your water situation?" His parents exchanged confused glances. "Just our vote, I suppose," his mother replied, "and to speak at conservation meetings about our success." She touched his arm. "Raymond, you're worrying me." "It's nothing, Mom," he lied, embracing her. "Just doing my job." Night fell over the ranch, bringing cooler air and a blanket of stars. Eleanor sat on the porch, listening to the quiet murmur of Marshals changing shifts and the occasional crackle of their radios. Sarah emerged from the house, 2 mugs in hand. She offered one to Eleanor before sitting in the adjacent rocker. "I've been over every document," she said. "There's a clear pattern of improper procedure in every ruling against you. Appeals denied without proper review, irregularities in environmental assessments, technical requirements changed after your submissions." Eleanor sipped her coffee. "Telling me what I already lived through doesn't help much now." "No, but legally documenting the pattern might," Sarah countered. "This isn't just corruption, Eleanor. It's criminal conspiracy across multiple jurisdictions." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken grievances between them. "I should have listened to you," Sarah finally said, her voice low. "About the water board, about fighting back." Eleanor's surprise must have shown on her face, because Sarah continued, "I thought I was being practical, protecting Michael from a losing battle. I didn't understand what this place meant to you." "To the family," Eleanor corrected. 4 generations of Winters have worked this land. It's not just dirt and grass, it's our history." "I know that now." Sarah set her mug down. In practice, I've seen too many families displaced by similar tactics, communities destroyed piece by piece." She looked out at the darkened landscape. "Michael and I should have stayed and fought alongside you." Eleanor felt something tightly, wound inside her, begin to loosen. "Where is my son, Sarah? Why isn't he here with you?" Sarah's smile was sad. "We separated last year, Eleanor. He took a job with an engineering firm in Denver, said he needed a fresh start." The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "You and Michael haven't spoken in years," Sarah reminded her gently. "That's on both of you." Before Eleanor could respond, Maya appeared at the edge of the porch. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've picked up movement." On the southern perimeter, surveillance equipment just triggered. Eleanor and Sarah rose simultaneously, the fragile moment of reconciliation giving way to renewed vigilance. "How many?" Eleanor asked, reaching for the shotgun she'd propped against the wall. "Can't tell yet," Maya replied, her hand resting on her sidearm. "Could be animals, could be scouts." In the darkness beyond the ranch house lights, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. The very ground they stood on, fought over, divided by paperwork and corruption, loved and worked by generations, was now the silent witness to a battle much larger than water rights. Eleanor glanced at Sarah, seeing for the first time not an adversary who'd taken her son away, but an ally in preserving what mattered. "You should head back to town, it's not safe here." Sarah straightened, a glint of determination in her eyes that reminded Eleanor of herself in younger days. "I'm staying. This is family business now." Together they turned to face whatever approached from the darkness. Eleanor woke to an unnatural amber light filtering through her bedroom curtains. After decades on the ranch, she recognized the warning sign immediately. Rising quickly, she moved to the window and peered out at the southern horizon, where a massive wall of dust, thousands of feet high, was advancing toward them. A haboob, one of the Southwest's most fearsome dust storms. "We've got trouble," she announced, finding Maya and two deputies at the kitchen table, reviewing security protocols. "Big storm coming in. We've got maybe an hour before it hits." Maya followed her onto the porch, eyes widening at the approaching wall of dust. "How bad will it get?" "Bad enough to knock out communications, reduce visibility to arm's length, and clog every engine and weapon you've got," Eleanor replied grimly, "and perfect cover for anyone wanting to move undetected." Inside, the ranch transformed into a hive of activity. Maya mobilized her team to secure equipment and establish contingency plans, while Eleanor gathered emergency supplies, lanterns, water, respirator masks she'd kept since the last major storm. Sarah emerged from the guest room, her lawyer's composure momentarily shaken by the apocalyptic sky. "That's not a normal dust storm." "Haboob," Eleanor explained, handing her a bandana. "Cover your face with this when it hits, and fill every container with water. We'll need it when the dust gets into everything." Luke, still recovering but insistent on staying involved, studied the property maps with Raymond. If Soto's planning to move, this would be ideal cover. "He'd be crazy not to use it," Raymond agreed. "I'd approach from Coyote Wash. It's the lowest elevation, offers cover, and leads directly to the outbuildings." Eleanor overheard them. "He's right. Thomas and I used to worry about rustlers using that same route during dust storms. We installed extra fencing, but it won't stop determined men." Maya's satellite phone rang, their last reliable communication before the storm would disrupt signals. Her expression darkened as she listened. "Sheriff Dalton's vehicle was spotted heading this way 20 minutes ago," she reported after hanging up. "He's alone, but we can't confirm if he's friendly or compromised." "Curtis wouldn't side with Blackwell," Eleanor insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. "But he might not know what he's walking into." The decision became moot as the wall of dust reached the outer perimeter of the ranch. Day transformed to apocalyptic twilight, the sun reduced to a dim orange disk barely visible through the airborne dirt. Wind howled against the windows, the first particles finding their way through the smallest cracks. "Everyone inside," Maya ordered, her voice raised above the wind. "Full lockdown. If Dalton makes it here, we'll assess his intentions before opening any doors." As the Marshal secured the house, Eleanor pulled Sarah aside. "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen. If things go bad, that's where we go." The storm's full fury descended within minutes. Visibility disappeared, the windows becoming opaque with caked dust. The electricity flickered, then died, leaving them in eerie half-light. Eleanor moved through the house with the confidence of someone who knew every board and nail, lighting kerosene lamps that cast long shadows across the walls. "Radio's dead," one of the deputies reported. "Cell service too. We're cut off." "Just like they planned," Luke muttered, checking his sidearm. Despite his injuries, he insisted on remaining armed. In Commissioner Blackwell's office across the county, panic reigned. He paced before his window, watching the dust storm engulf the town, while his phone showed an incoming call from a number he'd hoped never to see on his screen. "This wasn't the agreement," he hissed into the phone. "The Winters property was supposed to be handled legally, through the water rights process." Miguel Soto's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Plans change, Commissioner. The federal presence has accelerated our timeline. You can't just attack a ranch full of, as marshals." "I'm simply securing my investment," Soto replied, "one you've been handsomely compensated for facilitating." "This will bring down the entire operation," Blackwell protested. "They'll trace everything back to me." "Then I suggest you establish an alibi quickly," Soto said before disconnecting. Blackwell stared at his phone, then at the photos of his family on his desk. Within minutes, he was throwing essentials into a bag, preparing to flee. At the ranch, the first hour of the storm passed in tense vigilance. The wind screamed around the house like a living thing, rattling windows and doors. Dust seeped through every crack despite Eleanor's preparations, coating surfaces and irritating lungs. "How long will this last?" Sarah asked, tying a bandana over her nose and mouth. "Could be hours," Eleanor replied. "Could be all night." Maya positioned her remaining deputies strategically throughout the house, while Raymond monitored the outbuildings. Through specialized equipment that could penetrate the dust somewhat. "Movement at the south fence line," he suddenly reported, tension evident in his voice. "Multiple heat signatures advancing through Coyote Wash, just as we predicted." Maya joined him at the monitor. "How many?" "At least 6, maybe more. They're using the terrain for cover, exactly as I would." Eleanor approached, studying the grainy thermal images. "They're heading for the equipment barn. It connects to the main house through an underground storage room, a design flaw Thomas always meant to address." "You never mentioned that," Maya said sharply. "Never seemed important until now." Eleanor grabbed a shotgun from the wall rack. "I know that passage better than anyone. I should cover it." "I'm going with you," Sarah insisted, surprising. "Everyone." Eleanor started to object, then noticed the determined set of Sarah's jaw, the same expression she'd worn in court defending clients against water board decisions. "Fine, but you follow my lead." As they prepared to secure the storage room, a loud banging erupted from the front door. Maya signaled for silence, deputies taking cover with weapons trained on the entrance. "Eleanor, it's Curtis Dalton. Let me in before I suffocate out here." Maya approached cautiously, signaling Raymond to check the thermal camera. He confirmed a single figure on the porch, apparently unarmed. When they opened the door, Sheriff Dalton stumbled in, covered head, to toe in dust, coughing violently. 2 deputies immediately secured him while Maya assessed whether he posed a threat. "What are you doing here, Sheriff?" she demanded. "Warning you," he gasped, accepting a canteen from Eleanor. "Found water diversion equipment on the Carson property next door. Someone deliberately sabotaged the line to Eleanor's ranch." He looked directly at Eleanor. "You were right all along. I should have listened years ago." "We know about Blackwell," Maya informed him. "What we don't know is where you stand." Dalton straightened. "I've been sheriff in this county for 15 years. Never took a bribe, never looked the other way. If Blackwell's corrupt, I want him taken down as much as you do." "Soto's men are approaching from the south," Eleanor interjected. "We don't have time for debates about loyalty." A crash from the rear of the house ended the discussion. Raymond's voice crackled over the radio. "They've breached the equipment barn." Maya made her decision. "Sheriff, you're with me. Eleanor, Sarah, secure that underground passage. Raymond, maintain surveillance and direct our response. Eleanor led Sarah to the kitchen pantry, revealing a trap door hidden beneath a worn rug. The cellar below was cool and dark, lined with preserves Eleanor had put up in better times. At the far end, a narrow doorway connected to the tunnel leading to the equipment barn. "Stay behind me," Eleanor whispered, switching on a flashlight. "And take this." She handed Sarah a revolver. Sarah stared at the weapon. "I've never fired a gun in my life. Point and pull if someone who isn't us comes through that tunnel," Eleanor instructed. "It's not complicated." They positioned themselves behind storage barrels, creating a defensible position. In the close confines of the cellar, with dust filtering through the floorboards above, Eleanor suddenly felt the weight of their situation, an elderly rancher and a lawyer facing potentially cartel gunmen. "I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for your water rights," Sarah said softly. "I should have seen what was happening." Eleanor shook her head. "You tried to warn me it was a losing battle. You weren't wrong." "No, I was wrong," Sarah insisted. "Some battles are worth fighting even when the odds are terrible. You taught me that." Before Eleanor could respond, muffled gunshots sounded from the direction of the barn, followed by shouts and more gunfire. "Maya's team must have engaged them," Eleanor whispered. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they waited in the dim cellar, dust motes dancing in the flashlight beam. Then came the sound they'd been dreading, footsteps in the tunnel approaching slowly. Eleanor raised her shotgun, Sarah's revolver shaking slightly beside her. The footsteps stopped just beyond the doorway. A voice called out something in Spanish, then fell silent. The flashlight beam caught the barrel of a weapon poking through the doorway, followed by a man's arm. Eleanor held her fire, recognizing that shooting would give away their position to anyone else in the tunnel. The moment stretched, tense and fragile, until sudden gunfire erupted from deeper in the tunnel. Raymond's voice shouting commands, more shots exchanged. The arm withdrew quickly, its owner retreating toward the sound of conflict. "That's Raymond," Sarah whispered. "He must have circled around through the storm." The gunfire intensified, then stopped abruptly. Silence descended again, broken only by the howling wind above and the sound of someone approaching through the tunnel once more. "Eleanor? Sarah?" Raymond's voice echoed. "Area secure. You can come out." They emerged cautiously to find Raymond standing over an unconscious man in tactical gear. "One of Soto's men," he explained. "The others retreated back to the barn when I flanked them." Above them, the storm's fury began to lessen slightly, the howling diminishing to a persistent moan. Maya's voice crackled through Raymond's radio, reporting that the main house remained secure, but that intruders were still in the equipment barn. "We should get back upstairs," Raymond suggested. "The storm's starting to—" His words cut off as a figure lunged from the shadows of the tunnel, tackling him to the ground. The flashlight spun away, plunging the cellar into near darkness. Eleanor raised her shotgun, but couldn't risk firing with Raymond struggling in the gloom. Instead, she swung it like a club, connecting with the attacker's shoulder. He grunted in pain, but maintained his grip on Raymond. Sarah, acting on instinct, grabbed a preserved jar from a nearby shelf and brought it down on the attacker's head. The glass shattered, momentarily stunning him enough for Raymond to break free and subdue him properly. As they secured the second intruder, the wind above began to lessen noticeably. The first phase of the storm was passing, though the dust would linger in the air for hours. "Maya, to all points," the radio crackled. "Primary intruder moving toward the house from the barn. Appears to be Cartel Lieutenant Miguel Soto himself." Eleanor checked her shotgun, determination hardening her features. "Time I met the man who's been trying to steal my water and my land." The three of them made their way upstairs to find the ranch house in a state of controlled chaos, dust covering every surface, marshals moving between windows with weapons ready, Sheriff Dalton and Maya conferring over property maps. Through the kitchen window, Eleanor could make out a lone figure walking calmly through the swirling dust toward the house, apparently unconcerned about the armed federal agents surrounding him. "That's him," Luke confirmed from his position by the living room window. "Miguel Soto." Eleanor moved to the front door, shotgun held ready but not raised. Despite Maya's protest, she stepped onto the porch to face the man who had orchestrated the slow death of her ranch. The dust hung in the air like a rusty fog, creating an otherworldly backdrop as Soto stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He was younger than Eleanor had expected, dressed in expensive clothes, now ruined by the storm, his eyes calculating but not cruel. "Mrs. Winters," he called, his accent slight but noticeable. "I believe we have matters to discuss about the future of your property." Eleanor kept her shotgun visible but lowered. "I believe we do, Mr. Soto, though you picked a hell of a way to schedule a meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Behind her, she sensed, rather than saw, Maya and her team taking positions, ready to intervene. But for this moment, as the storm began to clear and visibility slowly returned, it was just her and Soto, two people fighting for survival in very different ways, facing each other across a porch laid bare by wind and dust and truth. Dawn revealed a transformed landscape. The dust storm had reshaped dunes, buried fences, and left Eleanor's ranch looking like an archaeological site, half excavated from desert sands. Inside the house, federal agents secured Miguel Soto to a kitchen chair while tending to their wounded. Two deputies with minor injuries from the barn confrontation and one with a more serious shoulder wound. Eleanor watched from the doorway as Maya efficiently coordinated both medical attention and security protocols. Despite the night's violence, there was something almost ceremonial about the quiet that had settled over the property, as if the storm had scoured away pretense along with topsoil. "He's asking to speak with you," Maya told Eleanor, nodding toward Soto. "Says there are things you should know." "About what?" Eleanor asked, skepticism evident in her tone. "About Blackwell. About the water. About why your property matters." Maya hesitated. "I'd advise against it, but it's your house." Eleanor studied Soto from across the room. Unlike his men, he hadn't resisted arrest when confronted on her porch. He'd simply raised his hands and smiled, as if the outcome had been calculated from the beginning. "Might as well hear what he has to say," Eleanor decided, crossing to the kitchen table. Soto looked up as she approached, his wrists secured to the chair arms but his posture relaxed. Close up, she could see the intelligence in his eyes and the fine lines around them, a man accustomed to squinting against harsh sun. "Mrs. Winters," he greeted her, his voice cultured and accent less pronounced than she'd expected. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Eleanor pulled out a chair and sat opposite him. "Don't mistake curiosity for courtesy, Mr. Soto. You've been trying to drive me off my land for 3 years. Now I want to know why." "4 generations," he said unexpectedly. "That's how long your family has worked this ranch, yes? My family had a cattle operation in Sonora. 5 generations. It was taken from us, not by cartels or criminals, but by corporations and corrupt officials who diverted the water just as Blackwell did to you." Eleanor's expression remained stony. "So you became what destroyed you." "I became what survives," Soto corrected. "The legitimate businesses, the law-abiding citizens, they were all washed away when the water disappeared. Only certain enterprises remained viable." "Smuggling drugs," Eleanor said flatly. Soto shrugged. "Among other things. The market exists, Mrs. Winters. I simply provide supply routes. Through my property. Your land completes a corridor that allows direct movement from the border to the interstate with minimal exposure. Soto explained, as matter of fact as if discussing crop rotation. The water restrictions were Blackwell's idea. Pressure you financially until selling seemed like the only option. A slower approach than I preferred, but less conspicuous. Eleanor leaned forward. Why are you telling me this? Because we are not so different, you and I, Soto replied. We both fight to preserve what matters to us against forces that would take it away. The difference is just in our methods. And our morals, Eleanor added pointedly. Soto smiled, faintly. Morality is a luxury, Mrs. Winters, like water in the desert. Across the county, Sheriff Curtis Dalton intercepted Commissioner Blackwell's SUV at the county line. Dawn light spilled across the roadblock Dalton had hastily arranged with his two most trusted deputies. Blackwell's vehicle slowed, then stopped as recognition dawned. He rolled down his window, the practiced smile already in place. Curtis, what's all this about? I'm late for a regional water management conference in Santa Fe. Dalton approached the vehicle, noting the hastily packed luggage in the back seat. With your family photo albums and your wife's jewelry? He asked, nodding toward an open case, where personal valuables were visible. Seems like an unusual conference preparation, James. I can explain. Save it, Dalton cut him off, opening the driver's door. Step out of the vehicle. You're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and whatever else the federal prosecutor decides to add, once I tell them about the water diversion equipment I found on the Carson property last night. Blackwell's charm evaporated, replaced by desperate calculation. Curtis, be reasonable. We can work something out. You and I have history. That's the problem, Dalton replied, securing handcuffs around Blackwell's wrists. I've spent 15 years looking the other way while you slowly poisoned this county. That ends today. As his deputies secured Blackwell in the patrol car, Dalton felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. The weight of complicity finally lifted. He'd spent years telling himself that maintaining order meant accommodating the occasional ethical compromise. Now he understood that true order couldn't exist alongside corruption. It merely disguised the rot beneath. Back at the ranch, Sarah spread documents across Eleanor's dining table, where dust had been hastily swept away. In the night, while others fought, she had continued her legal investigation, correlating water board decisions with property sales along the smuggling corridor. It goes back at least 6 years, she explained to Maya. Blackwell engineered water restrictions on specific properties, always in a particular geographic pattern. She traced the corridor on a county map. Some owners fought and lost, like Eleanor. Others sold quickly. In every case, the purchasing entities were shell corporations I've now linked to Soto's organization. Maya studied the pattern. This is exactly what Luke suspected. It's why they tried to kill him. I've also found evidence that Blackwell was manipulating environmental impact reports, Sarah continued, falsifying data to justify his decisions. She paused, glancing toward the kitchen where Eleanor still sat with Soto. There's enough here to challenge every water rights decision Blackwell's made in the past decade. And to put him away for considerably longer, Maya added. Sarah gathered the papers, her movements efficient and purposeful. The crisis had awakened something in her, a connection to her legal training that went beyond career ambition. This wasn't about winning cases anymore. It was about restoring justice to a community systematically undermined by corruption. I need to get these to the federal prosecutor's office, she said, and contact my colleagues who represented other ranches in the corridor. Some of these properties might still be recoverable. Maya regarded her with newfound respect. You've found your fight, haven't you? Sarah smiled faintly, glancing toward Eleanor. Maybe I just remembered whose blood runs in my veins. At the Albuquerque hospital, Luke Harmon signed discharge. Papers despite his doctor's evident disapproval. "The surgical wound hasn't fully healed," the doctor protested. "You need at least another week of recovery." "I'll follow up with my regular physician," Luke promised, already pulling on his shirt with careful movements that belied the pain each motion caused. Truth was, he hadn't slept properly since being evacuated from Eleanor's ranch. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the ambush that had killed his colleagues, or imagined Eleanor's property overrun while he lay useless in a hospital bed. The case had consumed him long before he'd been shot. The growing certainty that something systematic was happening along the border, that corruption had infiltrated local government to facilitate cartel operations. He'd pursued it alone initially, uncertain who he could trust, until he'd brought Maya into his confidence. Now Soto was in custody, but Luke knew the organization extended far beyond one lieutenant. The corridor was too valuable to abandon over a single arrest. His phone buzzed with a message from Maya: "Blackwell in custody, Soto talking, get well." Luke almost smiled. Maya knew him well enough to anticipate his actions, sending the update as a subtle suggestion to stay put. She should have known better. Some missions couldn't be delegated, and he'd started this one. He intended to finish it. The taxi he'd called was waiting outside. "Las Cruces," he told the driver, settling gingerly into the back seat. "I'll direct you from there." Eleanor concluded her conversation with Soto as Maya entered to inform them that Blackwell had been apprehended. "Your corridor is compromised, Mr. Soto," Maya said, professional but not gloating. "And your operation is exposed." Soto remained unperturbed. "My organization will adapt, Deputy Marshal. There are other routes, other opportunities." He looked at Eleanor, though few as efficient as this one. Eleanor rose from the table, suddenly tired of the man's philosophical fatalism. "You know what your mistake was? Thinking that water is just a commodity, something to control for profit. Around here, water is life itself. People don't forget who stole their life from them." She walked outside onto her porch, surveying the damage the storm had left behind. Equipment would need cleaning, fences required repair, and the fine dust would linger for weeks. But beneath these immediate concerns, Eleanor's mind worked on a larger problem. The water restrictions had been manipulative, but the water shortage itself was real. Drought conditions persisted throughout the region, and climate projections suggested things would only worsen. Fighting for her individual water rights had sustained her through years of struggle, but it suddenly seemed insufficient. Sarah joined, her on the porch, coffee mugs in hand. "Sheriff Dalton radioed. He's bringing Blackwell here for federal custody since the roads to the county seat are still partially blocked by drifts." Eleanor nodded absently, her gaze fixed on the southern boundary of her property, where Coyote Wash cut a ragged line toward the border. "You've got that look," Sarah observed, "the one Michael used to call your fixing to change things expression." "Maybe it's time some things changed," Eleanor replied. "This land has always been about survival, my family's survival. But maybe there's a way it could serve something larger." Sarah followed her gaze toward the wash. "What are you thinking?" "Water management has always been individual around here, every ranch for itself. But what if we approached it collectively? A watershed coalition with shared infrastructure and monitoring?" Eleanor turned to face her daughter-in-law. The same route Soto wanted for smuggling could become a managed water corridor with proper oversight. Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to consideration. It would require cooperation from multiple jurisdictions, federal involvement, completely restructuring water rights in the county. "You saying it can't be done?" Eleanor challenged. "I'm saying it would be an enormous undertaking," Sarah clarified. But her legal mind was already assessing possibilities. Though, with Blackwell's corruption exposed, there will be a complete overhaul of the water board anyway. A vehicle approached from the main road, a taxi raising a small plume of dust. It stopped near the house, and Luke emerged, moving stiffly, but with obvious determination. "Stubborn fool checked himself out," Maya muttered, coming to stand beside Eleanor. "Should have known he wouldn't stay put." Eleanor watched Luke make his way toward the porch, his face pale but resolute. She recognized the expression, the same determination that had kept her fighting for her land long after others would have surrendered. "Marshal Harmon," she called as he reached the steps. "You're just in time. I was about to propose something radical." Luke smiled faintly. "Mrs. Winters, I've come to expect nothing less from you." The morning sun climbed higher, burning away lingering dust from the air and illuminating the ranch in harsh clarity. The damage was extensive, but not irreparable. The land had endured worse over 4 generations, and would endure this, too. Eleanor looked out over her property with new eyes. For years, she had seen it as a battleground, her against the county, the drought, the slow erosion of her way of life. Now she began to see it as something else, a connecting point, a place where disparate interests might converge toward a common purpose. "I think it's time we stopped just defending this land," she announced to the small group gathered on her porch, "and started making it work for all of us." The idea was just taking shape in her mind, but Eleanor felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. Water could divide or unite. It all depended on how you channeled it. Like the arroyo that had brought Soto's men to her door, the right pathway could change everything. The question was whether they could redirect forces that had been flowing in destructive patterns for generations. As Sheriff Dalton's vehicle appeared on the horizon, bringing Blackwell to face justice, Eleanor began to outline her vision, not just for her property, but for the entire watershed that connected them all. 1 week after the dust storm, Eleanor's ranch house kitchen had become an unlikely nexus of change. Around her worn oak table sat an improbable coalition. Sheriff Dalton, Luke and Maya representing federal law enforcement, Sarah with her legal pad, Raymond with maps of the county water system, and 3 neighboring ranchers whose properties formed part of the corridor. The faces around the table reflected varying degrees of skepticism, interest, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. "This isn't just about water rights," Eleanor explained, standing at the head of the table with a certainty that belied her 73 years. "It's about reimagining how we relate to this land and to each other." She unfolded a large topographic map across the table's surface, the corridor properties highlighted in blue. "For generations, we've treated water as something to fight over, to hoard. But the aquifer doesn't recognize property lines, neither does drought." Arthur Mendez, whose cattle ranch bordered Eleanor's to the south, leaned forward with arms crossed. "So you're proposing we just share, after some of us have been getting squeezed dry while others got preferential treatment?" His gaze shifted pointedly toward Raymond, whose presence as both federal agent and son of water-rich landowners created obvious tension. "That preferential treatment was corruption," Eleanor replied firmly. The Willis family was as much a victim of Blackwell's manipulation as the rest of us. They just didn't know it. Raymond nodded, the past week having aged him visibly. His parents had faced community ostracism since the revelations about their water allocation, despite their innocence. "My family is prepared to participate fully in any equitable redistribution plan," he said quietly. "We want to make things right." Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat. "Eleanor's proposal isn't just about correcting past wrongs, it's about creating something sustainable." He gestured to the map. "This corridor has natural advantages for water collection and distribution. If managed properly, with modern conservation techniques, it could serve as a model for the entire region." "And the border security aspect?" Martin Herrera asked, his ranch being the closest to the international line. How does that factor in? Luke, still moving stiffly from his injuries, but clearly determined to be present, stepped forward. The same geography that makes this corridor valuable for water management makes it ideal for controlled, legal border movement. "You want to create an official crossing point?" Herrera asked incredulously. "We want to acknowledge reality," Luke corrected. "People will cross, goods will be transported. We can either continue fighting a losing battle against that fact, or we can create a system that channels it legally, taxes it appropriately, and monitors it effectively." Eleanor watched the ranchers exchange wary glances. These were conservative people by nature, suspicious of change and protective of their independence, but they were also practical, and the past decade of environmental pressures had pushed many to the brink of financial ruin. "I've spent 3 years fighting to keep my water," Eleanor said into the silence. "Many of you have fought the same battle, but what if the fight itself is what's draining us? What if cooperation gives us all a better chance at survival?" Sarah stood, adding her professional authority to Eleanor's personal appeal. "I've been consulting with environmental engineers and water rights specialists all week. The preliminary assessments are promising." She distributed folders containing technical data. A coordinated watershed management approach could increase overall water availability by 20 to 30% through reduced waste and strategic collection points. As the ranchers began examining the data, James Blackwell was being escorted through the ranch house to a waiting transport vehicle. Once the picture of affluent confidence, the former commissioner now moved with the deflated posture of a man, watching his life's accomplishments crumble. Seeing the meeting in the kitchen, he paused in the hallway. "They'll never agree to it, Eleanor," he called, a shadow of his former smug certainty in his voice. "These people have spent generations fighting each other over every drop of water. You think they'll suddenly join hands because you ask nicely?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "No, James. They'll do it because the alternative is watching everything. They've built disappear, something you helped engineer." "I did what was necessary to keep this county afloat," Blackwell countered, a flash of his old self-righteousness returning. "The tax base was shrinking, infrastructure failing, the cartel. Money rebuilt roads, funded schools. At what cost?" Sheriff Dalton challenged, joining Eleanor in the doorway. Blackwell's expression shifted calculatingly. "I have names, dates, bank accounts, higher-level contacts than Soto. Information that would be valuable to federal prosecutors." "Bargaining." "Already?" Maya asked coldly, appearing behind him. "Save it for the U.S. attorney. Your transport's ready." As Blackwell was led away, Eleanor returned to the kitchen, where debate had intensified among the ranchers. The meeting continued for hours, technical questions giving way to deeper concerns about trust, fairness, and the practical challenges of cooperation after years of competition. By late afternoon, no consensus had been reached, but something had shifted. The conversation had moved from if to how, a subtle but critical transition that Eleanor recognized from decades of negotiations at cattle auctions and property sales. As the ranchers departed with promises to discuss the proposal with their families, Sarah approached Eleanor with a cautious smile. "That went better than I expected." "They'll come around," Eleanor replied. "They're just not used to thinking collectively. None of us are." Luke remained at the table, studying the map with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something beyond its physical features. Eleanor sat beside him, her knees protesting the long day of standing. "You don't seem convinced, Marshal Harmon," she observed. Luke looked up, his pale eyes troubled. "The plan has merit, Mrs. Winters, but it assumes rationality will prevail. My experience suggests otherwise." "You're worried about the cartel," she stated flatly. "Soto was a lieutenant, not the decision-maker. His organization has invested considerable resources in this corridor. They won't abandon it easily, especially not to a legitimate alternative that undermines their business model. Then we build insecurity from the beginning, Eleanor countered. Make it part of the water management system. Luke's smile held no humor. I've spent my career chasing people who view obstacles as opportunities for escalation. They'll test any system we create. So we make it stronger than they expect. Eleanor insisted, unwilling to surrender her vision to fear. This land has faced threats before, Marshal Harmon. Drought, economic collapse, corrupt officials. We're still here. Before Luke could respond, commotion erupted outside. Through the window, Eleanor saw Miguel Soto being escorted toward a separate transport vehicle by 4 federal agents. Unlike Blackwell, Soto maintained his composure, his bearing almost regal despite the handcuffs. A sudden movement at the perimeter caught Eleanor's attention, a dark SUV accelerating toward the convoy, its windows lowered. Luke saw it simultaneously, shouting a warning as he reached for his weapon. The next seconds unfolded with nightmarish clarity. Gunfire erupted from the SUV. The Marshal nearest Soto fell. Maya, emerging from the house, returned fire with precision. The vehicle swerved, crashing into the fence line. More shots were exchanged as the transport team sought cover, dragging Soto with them. When it ended, 2 attackers lay dead beside their vehicle. One Marshal was wounded, but alive, and Soto remained in custody, his expression revealing neither surprise nor disappointment at the failed rescue attempt. This is what we're dealing with, Luke said quietly to Eleanor as medical personnel rushed to assist the wounded agent. People willing to die or kill to maintain the status quo. Eleanor watched as Soto was secured in the transport vehicle, his gaze meeting hers briefly through the window. There was something almost like respect in that look, acknowledging their fundamental difference in approach to survival. All the more reason to change it, she replied. The warning came at dusk, 3 weeks after the dust storm. Eleanor was checking water measurements at the newly uncapped well when Sheriff Dalton's cruiser skidded to a stop beside her truck, dust billowing around the tires. "Got word from a border patrol contact," he said without preamble. "Large cartel. Contingent crossed over 4 hours ago. At least 15 men, heavily armed. They're coming for the ranch." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Luke's intelligence had proven accurate. The cartel considered the corridor too valuable to abandon without a significant show of force. "How long do we have?" "Hours, not days," Dalton replied grimly. "I've already called Luke. He's mobilizing whatever federal resources he can, but they'll need time to deploy." Eleanor wiped her hands on her jeans, her mind racing through contingencies. "Get on the radio. Alert everyone in the Watershed Coalition. This isn't just my fight anymore." Within an hour, Eleanor's ranch had transformed into an unlikely fortress. Maya arrived with a tactical team, establishing a defensive perimeter and communications hub in the main house. To Eleanor's surprise, ranchers began appearing as well. Arthur Mendez with his 3 sons, the Herrera family, even old Frank Tillman, who hadn't spoken to Eleanor since a property line dispute 15 years ago. "Heard you might need some help," Mendez said simply, shouldering a hunting rifle. "Figure if they're coming for you today, might be us tomorrow." More vehicles arrived. Raymond with his parents, local deputies coordinating with Maya's federal team, and finally Sarah, who had been in Albuquerque pursuing grant approvals for the Watershed Project. "You should have stayed in the city," Eleanor told her when she burst through the door, clearly having driven at dangerous speeds to reach the ranch. "This is my home too," Sarah replied firmly, embracing Eleanor before joining the strategy session. At the kitchen table, Luke arrived last, having pulled together a response team from multiple federal agencies, but still woefully outnumbered against the approaching threat. He surveyed the improvised militia of ranchers and lawmen with the professional's eye, "Motley bunch," he observed to Eleanor, "but there's something to be said for defending your own land." As darkness settled over the ranch, a tense calm descended. Maya assigned positions, distributed radios, and established fallback points. Sarah surprised everyone by using her environmental expertise to identify tactical advantages. The north. Access road floods with even minimal rain, she pointed out on the map. There was precipitation last night near the mountains. They'll have to detour through the Ramirez Wash, which narrows here. She circled a location. Perfect choke point. Eleanor watched with something like pride as Sarah seamlessly transitioned from corporate lawyer to tactical advisor, her intimate knowledge of the region's hydrology proving unexpectedly valuable. Meanwhile, Raymond and Sheriff Dalton coordinated the evacuation of the most vulnerable neighboring properties, families with children, the elderly, anyone who might be caught in the crossfire. The community was rallying in ways Eleanor couldn't have imagined a month ago, before water rights and corruption had exposed both the worst and best of human nature. Movement at the southern perimeter, Maya's voice crackled over the radio. Shortly after midnight, multiple vehicles approaching with lights off. Eleanor and Luke were checking supplies in the equipment barn when the first shots rang out. A staccato burst of automatic fire, followed by the deeper report of hunting rifles as the ranchers returned fire. "We need to get back to the house," Luke said, his hand on his sidearm. Before they could move, headlights swept across the barn entrance as a vehicle swerved toward their position. Luke pushed Eleanor behind a tractor as bullets splintered the wooden walls. "They're attacking from multiple directions," Maya's voice reported through the radio. "Coordinated assault. We have men down in the north field." Luke tried the side door, only to pull back as gunfire erupted from that direction as well. "We're cut off," he told Eleanor, his voice calm despite the dire circumstance. "They've surrounded the barn." Eleanor assessed their situation with the same practical detachment she'd applied to cattle disease and failed crops over the decades. "There's a root cellar trap door under those feed bags. It connects to an irrigation tunnel my grandfather dug. Might give us a way out." Together, they shifted the heavy bags, revealing the ancient wooden door beneath. As Luke pulled it open, the radio crackled again, this time with troubling news. "Be advised, we have a breach in the security perimeter. Someone knew our positions, possibly internal compromise." Eleanor and Luke exchanged grim looks. A betrayal from within their hastily assembled defense force complicated an already desperate situation. Inside the main house, Maya demonstrated why Luke held her in such high regard. With the defense plan compromised, she rapidly reorganized their positions, moving people away from exposed locations while maintaining fire discipline among the civilian ranchers who were prone to waste. "Ammunition. Use terrain advantage," she instructed over the radio. "Remember Sarah's map. Drive them toward the flooded sectors." Sarah herself had found unexpected courage under fire. When a window shattered in the kitchen, she responded not with fear, but with focused action, helping a wounded deputy to cover while returning critical information about attacker positions. "They're concentrating force along the eastern approach," she reported to Maya, "but they don't know about the sinkhole that formed there last month. If we can draw them further in that direction—" "Already on it," Maya confirmed. Outside, the situation deteriorated as the cartel forces pressed their numerical advantage. Several ranchers were wounded, though none fatally. The defenders were being pushed back toward the house in a slowly contracting perimeter. In the equipment barn, Eleanor led Luke through the narrow tunnel, their progress slowed by his still healing injuries. The passage was barely wide enough for their shoulders, forcing them to move in single file through the darkness with only a small flashlight to guide them. "Grandfather built these irrigation tunnels during the Dust Bowl," Eleanor explained, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Said a man should always have a way out that others don't know about." "Wise man," Luke commented, wincing. As his shoulder scraped the rough wall, they emerged inside an unused water cistern, 50 yards from the main house, but still behind cartel lines. From their position, they could see the ranch house illuminated by sporadic muzzle flashes as the firefight intensified. "We need to circle around, try to flank them," Luke suggested, checking his ammunition. Eleanor nodded, then paused as another vehicle approached from the county road. Not the tactical reinforcements they desperately needed, but a civilian truck she recognized. "That's Raymond's father," she said in disbelief. The elder Willis parked behind the cartel position and emerged with his hunting rifle, joined by 3 other men from neighboring ranches who had initially refused to join the watershed coalition. Without coordination or tactical training, they nonetheless opened fire on the cartel gunmen from behind, creating momentary confusion in the attack. "Seems the community's chosen sides," Luke observed. Eleanor felt a swell of emotion that transcended the danger. These were people who had fought each other for generations over water rights and fence lines, now standing together against a common threat. Across the property, Raymond demonstrated that his federal training had been built upon a foundation of local knowledge. When a family he'd been evacuating became trapped by advancing cartel forces, he led them through a dry creek bed that locals knew but outsiders would overlook, placing himself between the danger and the children he was protecting. Inside the command center, Maya's radio crackled with an identification of the betrayal. A deputy newly transferred from a neighboring county had provided the attackers with their defensive positions. He was now secured, but the damage was done. As Eleanor and Luke made their way cautiously toward the house, using irrigation ditches for cover, they found themselves temporarily pinned down behind a low stone wall. Bullets struck the stones inches above their heads, sending fragments flying. "Some retirement plan you've got here," Luke commented dryly. Eleanor smiled despite the circumstances. Never was much for rocking chairs. A lull in the firing allowed a moment of unexpected connection between them. 2 people from vastly different backgrounds who had found common cause. "Why did you stay?" Luke asked suddenly. "All those years fighting the water board, watching your land dry up. Most would have sold and moved on." Eleanor considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "This land knows me," she finally said, "knows my family. Every ridge and wash has a story. My husband's buried on that hill there." She nodded toward a distant rise. Leaving would feel like abandoning him too. Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've spent my career chasing people, moving from case to case. Never put down. Roots anywhere." "And now?" Eleanor asked. Before he could answer, gunfire erupted again, more intense than before. A portion of the ranch house roof had caught fire, flames illuminating the battlefield in flickering orange light. Through his tactical scope, Luke assessed the situation. "They're making a push for the house, all-out assault." He raised his radio. "Maya, you've got multiple hostiles converging on your position." "Acknowledged," came the terse reply. "We're holding, but ammunition is running low." "Where are you?" "South stone wall, preparing to move on your position." Eleanor touched Luke's arm. "There's another way. The main irrigation control runs under this section. If we can reach it, we can flood the area between the attackers and the house." Luke's eyes widened slightly. "You'd flood your own land?" "Land recovers," Eleanor replied simply. "People don't." Together, they made their way to the control point, a concrete housing that regulated water flow from the upper property. With effort, they managed to divert the accumulated rainwater from recent storms, creating a sudden rush across the firing, a zone that caught the attackers by surprise. Men stumbled in suddenly muddy ground, vehicles bogged down, and the coordinated assault faltered. Taking advantage of the confusion, Maya led a counterattack from the house, supported by Sheriff Dalton and the ranchers. The cartel forces, finding themselves suddenly outflanked and in deteriorating terrain conditions, began a disorganized retreat. The sound of helicopters overhead signaled the arrival of state police and additional federal agents. Spotlights swept the property as the remaining attackers scattered, some captured, others escaping into the darkness. By dawn, the immediate threat had passed. The ranch house still stood, though damaged by fire and bullets. Several outbuildings had been destroyed, fields were churned by vehicle tracks and flooded by Eleanor's irrigation gambit. Deputies and agents secured the perimeter while medics treated the wounded. Eleanor stood on her porch, surveying the devastation as the rising sun illuminated the full extent of the damage. Sarah joined her, a bandage on her arm where flying glass had cut her. "Was it worth it?" Sarah asked quietly, following Eleanor's gaze across the scarred landscape. Eleanor considered the question, watching as neighbors who had been strangers, or even enemies, now worked together to tend wounded and secure the property. She saw Raymond reuniting with his parents, the pride evident in his father's face. She watched Maya efficiently coordinating with Sheriff Dalton as though they'd worked together for years rather than days. Most telling was Luke, moving among the defenders and checking on each person with the care of someone who had found something worth protecting, rather than just another case to solve. "Yes," Eleanor answered finally. "Whatever happens next, this was worth it." The sun continued to rise over the damaged ranch, revealing both destruction and possibility. The land had been scarred before, by drought, by neglect, by corruption, and had recovered. It would again, Eleanor knew, perhaps stronger, for having been fought for not just by one stubborn woman, but by an entire community that had finally recognized their shared stake in its survival. That evening, Raymond visited his parents' farm, finding them on the front porch, where generations of his family had gathered after long days working the land. His father's face had developed new lines in recent days, his mother's smile more hesitant. "The Mendez family wouldn't sell us feed today," his father said without preamble. "Said they don't do business with water thieves." Raymond sat heavily on the porch steps. "I'm sorry this is falling on you. None of it was your fault." "We benefited, Ray," his mother said softly. "Knowingly or not, our good fortune came at others' expense." "Eleanor's proposal could help," Raymond suggested carefully. "If we participate actively, demonstrate good faith, your grandfather would turn in his grave." His father interrupted. "Will this land managed by committee? Water flowing from our property to others by design?" "Grandpa also believed in making things right," Raymond countered. "This isn't just about water anymore. It's about rebuilding trust." His parents exchanged glances. A silent communication developed through decades of partnership. "We'll think on it," his father finally conceded. "Can't promise more than that." Raymond nodded, understanding this was already a significant concession from a man who prided himself on self-sufficiency. The corrupted water rights had damaged more than just the land. They'd poisoned relationships, shattered community bonds, and undermined the very independence they were meant to protect. Redemption would require more than legal corrections. It would demand a new way of seeing their place in the larger watershed, both literal and figurative, that connected them all. 2 days later, Sarah strode into Eleanor's kitchen with an expression suggesting significant news. "The environmental impact assessment came back," she announced, setting her briefcase on the table. "And I've been in contact with 3 federal agencies about grant funding for infrastructure improvements." Eleanor looked up from her accounts, reading Sarah's expression. "Good news or bad?" "Cautiously optimistic," Sarah replied, extracting documents from her briefcase. "The water management portion of the plan has received preliminary approval from the state engineer's office. The border access component is more complicated, but there's interest from customs and border protection in a pilot program." Eleanor noticed the energy in Sarah's movements, the fierce focus that had replaced her earlier corporate polish. The past weeks had transformed her daughter-in-law, reconnecting her with the passionate idealism that had originally drawn her to environmental law. "You're enjoying this," Eleanor observed. Sarah paused, seeming surprised by the comment. "I am," she admitted. "For years I've been helping individual clients navigate broken systems. This is a chance to fix the system itself." She smiled ruefully. "Maybe Michael was right to bring me to the ranch after all. Just wrong about the timing." Eleanor felt a twinge at the mention of her absent son. "Have you told him what's happening here?" "We've spoken briefly," Sarah acknowledged. "He's processing. Said he might visit when things settle down." Before Eleanor could respond, Luke entered with Maya, their expressions suggesting business rather than casual conversation. "Federal prosecutor wants to meet with you," Luke informed Eleanor. "Your testimony will be central to the cases against both Blackwell and Soto." "Fine," Eleanor agreed, "but I have conditions. Any plea deals must include restoration of proper water rights to affected properties, and I want Blackwell's cooperation in identifying all corrupted water allocations." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating terms with the Department of Justice." "I'm stating my priorities," Eleanor corrected. "Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about restoration." Luke studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see past surfaces. "You're serious about this watershed coalition, aren't you? It's not just talk." "Dead serious," Eleanor confirmed. "This land was never meant to be carved up into isolated kingdoms at war with each other. The water connects us whether we acknowledge it or not. Time we worked with that reality instead of against it." Luke nodded slowly, then shared a glance with Maya that Eleanor couldn't quite interpret. "There's something else you should know," he said. "We've received intelligence that Soto's superiors consider the corridor compromised but still valuable. They'll likely test any new system you establish." Eleanor absorbed this, then shrugged. "So we build it strong enough to withstand testing." "It's not that simple," Luke began. "It never is," Eleanor interrupted. "But I didn't survive 73 years in this unforgiving country by backing down from complicated challenges." The afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, remnants of the storm that had changed everything. Eleanor looked around at the people gathered in her kitchen, Sarah with her legal expertise, Luke and Maya with their commitment to justice, Raymond with his local knowledge and personal stake in redemption. A week ago, they had been strangers united only by circumstance. Now they were partners in reimagining the very land beneath their feet, not as a battleground for competing interests, but as a shared watershed that could sustain them all if properly tended. Outside, the first faint green shoots had appeared in fields long parched by artificial drought, tentative evidence that with proper water flow restored, renewal remained possible. Eleanor found herself thinking of her conversation with Soto, his fatalistic acceptance that survival required becoming what had once destroyed you. She preferred a different vision, that survival might instead demand becoming something entirely new, something that transcended old boundaries and reimagined what connection could mean in a land defined by scarcity. As preliminary approval for her conservation plan began moving through bureaucratic channels, Eleanor felt a cautious hope taking root, as fragile and determined as those green shoots pushing through crusted earth, transforming desolation into possibility, one small, persistent blade at a time. The October morning dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn chill to make the coffee steam visibly as Eleanor carried her mug onto the porch. She settled into her rocking chair, observing the transformation before her with quiet satisfaction. Where barren, cracked earth had dominated 6 months earlier, green shoots now pushed through rejuvenated soil. The barn, rebuilt with community labor, gleamed with fresh paint. Most striking was the new water management station at the property's southern edge, a modern facility housing monitoring equipment, flow controls, and the modest border checkpoint that had been the most controversial aspect of the watershed plan. Eleanor sipped her coffee, recalling the skeptics who had insisted such a vision could never succeed. Yet here it was, taking physical form across the landscape that had sustained her family for generations, now reborn as something that would sustain an entire community. Sarah emerged from the house, her own coffee in hand, dressed in a suit that contrasted with Eleanor's worn jeans and flannel shirt. "Big day," she observed, taking the adjacent rocker. "Nervous?" Eleanor snorted softly. "About a bunch of politicians making speeches?" "Survived worse." Sarah smiled, knowing the gruffness masked Eleanor's deeper emotions. In the months since the cartel attack, their relationship had evolved beyond reconciliation to genuine partnership. Sarah had dedicated her legal expertise to the watershed project, navigating the Byzantine regulations and jurisdictional conflicts that had threatened to derail it multiple times. "The governor's coming," she reminded Eleanor, "and the regional director of CBP, not to mention all your neighbors." "Just people," Eleanor replied, though she straightened her collar unconsciously. By mid-morning, vehicles began arriving. Government SUVs with official plates, ranchers in dust-covered trucks, media vans with satellite dishes. The small parking area Eleanor had designated quickly overflowed, requiring Raymond and several volunteers to direct traffic into adjoining fields. A large tent had been erected near the new water management facility, with rows of folding chairs and a small podium. Eleanor observed the preparations from a distance, still finding it surreal that her private struggle had transformed into this public endeavor. "Quite a turnout," Luke's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him approaching along the fence line, looking different in a formal suit instead of his usual tactical gear. His injuries had healed, though he still favored his right side slightly when walking. "Barely recognize you without a gun on your hip," Eleanor commented. Luke smiled. "Still there, just hidden better." He surveyed the gathering crowd. "You've built something remarkable here, Eleanor." "We all did," she corrected. "Never would have happened if you hadn't nearly died on my property." "Happy to have contributed," he replied dryly. Together, they walked the perimeter of what had once been just Winters Ranch, and was now designated as the Border Watershed Cooperative, a peculiar hybrid of private ownership and shared management that had required special legislation to establish. "The final prosecutions came through yesterday," Luke informed her as they walked. "Soto got 20 years, Blackwell 15, reduced from 25 for his cooperation in identifying the higher-level cartel connections." "And the money?" Eleanor asked, referring to the recovery of funds from the corruption scheme, being distributed to the affected landowners as we speak, should help with restoration costs. Luke paused at the repaired section of fence where cartel vehicles had crashed through during the attack. "The regional directors establishing a permanent task force focused on water rights corruption across the border states. Maya's been tapped to lead it." "Good choice," Eleanor nodded. "That woman knows how to get things done." They continued walking, observing the changes in the landscape. New monitoring wells, marked by solar-powered equipment, restored wetland areas already attracting birds, irrigation channels redesigned for maximum efficiency. "You walking the boundary out of professional habit?" Eleanor asked, "or avoiding all those people in suits?" Luke smiled ruefully. "Both, I suppose. 20 years in the Marshal service makes me more comfortable on the perimeter than center stage." "Know the feeling?" Eleanor admitted. "Never was one for crowds myself." They reached the hill where Thomas Winters was buried, a simple stone marker beneath a juniper tree. Eleanor hadn't visited since before the dust storm, finding excuses to avoid the emotional reckoning she knew awaited her there. "Mind if I have a moment?" she asked quietly. Luke nodded, understanding without need for explanation. I'll see you at the ceremony. Alone with her husband's grave, Eleanor removed her hat, feeling uncharacteristically vulnerable. Well, Thomas, you wouldn't recognize the place now, she began, her voice soft against the wind. All those fights we had with the water board, all those nights worrying about the ranch failing. Never imagined it would end up like this. She knelt, brushing dust from the marker with calloused fingers. Got federal agents and politicians crawling all over our land, sharing water with neighbors we used to feud with. She paused, a wry smile touching her lips. You'd probably hate half of it, but the land's coming back, that much you'd approve of. Eleanor remained in silent communion for several minutes more, feeling a weight lifting that she hadn't fully acknowledged. Was there? Thomas had been gone 5 years, but she'd been carrying on their shared battle as if he were still beside her, defending their isolation against all comers. Now she was leading a community effort that redefined the very purpose of the land they'd worked together. Things change, she finally said. Reckon that's how it should be. She touched the stone one last time before replacing her hat. I'll be back sooner next time. When Eleanor returned to the gathering, the ceremony was about to begin. Sarah intercepted her with a concerned look. Everything okay? You disappeared. Just saying hello to Thomas, Eleanor replied simply. He should be part of today, too. The ceremony itself was mercifully concise. Government officials praised the innovative public-private partnership and model for sustainable border management. Eleanor sat in the front row beside Sarah, more interested in watching the faces of her neighbors than listening to prepared speeches. Arthur Mendez, once her most vocal critic, now served on the Watershed Management Board and had already reported increased yield from his fields under the new irrigation schedule. Frank Tillman had donated equipment to help rebuild, after the attack, beginning to mend their 15-year feud. Most notably, Raymond's parents sat proudly among the original coalition members, their initial reluctance transformed into active participation after their son's heroism during the cartel attack had reminded them of their deeper values. Sheriff Dalton received special recognition for his role in exposing Blackwell's corruption. As he accepted the plaque, Eleanor noticed him sharing a meaningful glance with his newly appointed deputy, a young woman who represented the first female officer. In the department's history, the cynicism that had characterized Dalton for years had given way to cautious mentorship, as if the renewal around him had awakened his own capacity for growth. When Eleanor's turn came to speak, she approached the podium with characteristic directness, dispensing with the prepared remarks Sarah had helped draft. Not much for speeches, she began, earning knowing chuckles from those who knew her well. 6 months ago, this land was dying, not just from drought, but from how we were fighting each other instead of the real problems. She paused, surveying the faces before her. Won't pretend this new arrangement is perfect. We'll have disagreements, we'll make mistakes, but we're making them together now, and that's the difference. She gestured toward the monitoring station, its solar panels, gleaming in the sun. Water doesn't recognize property lines or national boundaries. Neither does corruption, as we learned the hard way. Only thing that stops either one is people working together, watching out for the whole system, not just their piece of it. Eleanor concluded simply, "Thanks for being here. Let's make it work." The modest statement earned stronger applause than any of the polished political speeches had received. As the formal ceremony transitioned into a community gathering, with food prepared by neighboring families and music from local musicians, Sarah approached Eleanor with unexpected news. "I signed the lease this morning," she announced. "Office space in Las Cruces for a regional branch of the firm, focused specifically on water rights law." Her expression was animated with purpose. "There's so much need for this work, Eleanor. What happened here is just the surface of water corruption issues across the Southwest." Eleanor felt a momentary pang at the thought of Sarah leaving the ranch after these months of growing closer, but pride quickly replaced it. "You found your calling." "I'm not going far," Sarah assured her, correctly reading her expression. "Besides, Michael called last night. He's thinking about visiting." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. Her son hadn't returned to the ranch since leaving with Sarah years earlier. What brought that on? Apparently, there was a feature about the watershed project in an engineering journal. He saw your name and... Sarah shrugged. Maybe he's ready to see what's changed. Before Eleanor could process this development, Maya approached, resplendent in her formal uniform, with new commendation. "Mrs. Winters," she greeted Eleanor with a warm handshake. "The regional director wants to speak with you about expanding the program to other border properties." The afternoon continued in this fashion. Conversations, connections, plans, building upon plans. What had begun as Eleanor's desperate defense of her water rights had expanded into something that now had momentum beyond any individual's control. As sunset approached and the crowd thinned, Eleanor found herself standing beside the old well, the one whose dropping levels had first alerted her to the water theft years ago. Luke joined her there, changed back into more comfortable clothing now that the official events had concluded. "Full circle," he observed, nodding toward the well. "Not quite," Eleanor replied, working the pump handle. "Circle suggests ending, up where you started." Water flowed smoothly from the spout, clean, consistent, and measured by the new monitoring equipment that ensured sustainable withdrawal. Eleanor filled a bucket, then offered Luke a dipper. "When I found you half dead, on my property, I had to choose between saving my water or saving a stranger," she reminded him. Seemed like competing needs at the time. Luke accepted the dipper, understanding the significance of the gesture. "And now?" "Now I understand better," Eleanor said, watching the water catch the last golden light of day. "Some things must be defended alone, but the most precious resources..." She gestured toward the dispersing community members, the restored land, the new infrastructure built from cooperation rather than conflict. "Survive only when shared." Luke nodded, returning the dipper. "I've requested permanent assignment to this region," he said, the casual delivery belying the significance of the decision for a man who had spent his career in constant motion. "Someone needs to ensure what you've built here stays protected." Eleanor smiled, recognizing his statement for what it was, not just professional commitment, but personal investment in a place that had come to matter to him. "Watershed needs all kinds of guardians," she agreed. As darkness settled over the land, lights came on in the monitoring station, a continuous vigil of instruments measuring, recording, and sharing data across properties that had once been isolated kingdoms. The system wasn't perfect, Eleanor knew. It would require constant attention, adjustments, and defense against those who would exploit it. But as she closed the well and walked back toward the house with Luke, she felt a certainty that had eluded her for years. The ranch would survive, though transformed. The water would flow, though shared, and the connections forged through crisis would endure, creating something more resilient than any single property could achieve alone. Eleanor Winters had spent a lifetime defending her boundaries. Now, in the autumn of her years, she had helped redraw them, not to exclude, but to encompass something larger than herself. Like the watershed that gave the project its name, the true pattern had always been there, waiting to be recognized. Separate streams, flowing together, finding strength in unity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Miss Cars.